additional questions you may have. So we're going to go back to this dashboard, and I'm going to show you the next section, which is our survey results. We'll spend the most time here because it has the most content to go through. This is really an area where you can check both the completion and the well-being scores from your survey. It has 3 areas that you can dig into, and the first is our sample status, and this is really just a way to track who's completed the survey. The next is our results summary, and this is sort of a high-level look at organizational well-being. And then the last one is our results breakdown, and that's really where you can get in and filter some results and start to play around to see patterns and trends within your data. So we're going to start with our sample status. And so this, like I said, is really a way that you can track completion, who's completed your survey. So you can see here we have a span of about a week when we had the survey open, and you can see how many people completed at any given time. What's helpful here is you can also filter the information by those demographic questions. So you can see here that demographic question we added on what team you're on is added here. So I can see how many people completed from each team, which helps me really understand who's completed and who hasn't. Now, all of the survey completions are anonymous, so you won't be able to see names, but being able to see how many people per team might be helpful in sort of reaching out and making sure you're getting people to complete on time. The next part of the survey results section is our results summary. And like I said, this is sort of a high-level look at the organization's well-being scores. And this won't be available until after you've sort of set and passed the completion date for your survey. So it just aggregates it at a certain point in time that you set. So this is your high-level overview of your different well-being scores, and there's actually 5 different areas to dig into within this section. The first is satisfaction insights, and then you've got well-being scores, readiness insights, feeling results, and system support. We'll just look through these really quickly. I know I'm going pretty fast, but I want to be able to show everything that the tool has to offer. And so the first one, as I mentioned, is satisfaction insights. And this area really gives you a satisfaction score for different areas of your organization's well-being. So the first one is a job satisfaction, and this is how satisfied individuals are with their roles, an aggregate score of that. The next is team satisfaction. This is how satisfied individuals are with their teams. And the last one is an organization satisfaction. This is how satisfied people are in their organization. Now the next section, which is that orange well-being scores, this breaks that down into a little bit more specific of information. And it actually breaks it down into the 6 PERMAH categories, which you can see here. And these are scores out of 100. And you can see that it's done at 3 different levels. The first level is individual. And so this is an aggregate score of how individuals feel about their own levels of well-being. The next level down is team. And this is how individuals feel about their team's well-being and their team's ability to support well-being. And then the last one you'll see, oh, I went too fast, is the organization level. And that's really how individuals feel about their organization's ability and efforts to support well-being. And then, now if I scroll down, there's also this graph of state of well-being, and you'll see this sort of consistently mimicked throughout the other sections. And it takes that quadrant, remember, from of thriving and struggling, and it categorizes people in those really struggling, not feeling bad, just getting by, living well despite struggle, and consistently thriving. And then it tells you how they're doing in each of the categories of PERMAH based on where they land in that quadrant. So you can see that people who are consistently thriving generally have, in our organization, high levels of positive emotion, high levels of engagement, relationships, and meaning. Okay. Let's move to the next section within the results summary, which is the readiness insights. And this might look familiar to you. The readiness insights are really around your organization's well-being confidence and well-being motivation. And if you remember well-being confidence, which has changed slightly in more recent versions to well-being ability, that's employees' confidence that they have the knowledge and skills to be able to improve their well-being, should they choose to. And well-being motivation is really just people's motivation to actually improve their well-being. You can see that there is another a chart like we had in the last one that once again takes those people categorized by those quadrants and identifies what their levels of confidence and motivation are. So just another way to look at the information. One thing to note on this section is just that sometimes our readiness indicators are our leading indicators. So we might see change happen around confidence and motivation before we see that actually translated into either satisfaction insights or well-being scores. The second to last category is our feeling results. And this is really that quadrant, as you remember, and those 4 different categories. And it just puts people into those categories. So at Meyerson Academy, we don't have anyone who's really struggling. We have 53% of people in that living well despite struggle, 7% in not feeling bad, just getting by, and 40% in consistently thriving. And if you remember, we really want people in those light blue and those green categories. And then lastly here is system support. And so this is the last section and probably feels like the most new section of data around well-being. And so this just shows you a few additional measures that have been shown as possible indicators that impact an organization's ability to have a culture of well-being. So these are additional sort of like cultural indicators that would affect an organization's ability to actually create this culture of well-being in their workplace. And so there are a couple of different factors within this: autonomy, relatedness, competence, resources, psychological safety, and physical safety that are all divided out into that individual, team, and organization. And as I mentioned, these just give you another level of awareness and understanding of what might be coming into play. If you're not seeing the well-being results that you expected, there might be something to dig into here. And just as the other categories, there are those different sections are also divided out using those quadrants as the organizing factor. So that was the results section. I'm going to pause again to see if there was any questions around well-being results just for this section. We still actually have one more, which is the breakdown, but I'll pause really quickly to see if anyone had any questions on sort of high-level well-being results and what's possible to see on the dashboard.
I have a question in this area. What happens to teams that only have one person on them? How do you continue to keep them confidential in the context of a report like this?
I love that question. So, so what this report and what this data actually pulls information on is not information that is disaggregated by a team, but how all individuals feel about their team. So one important note to make is to specify what you want people to think about when they think about their team. So maybe that's really clearly divided in your organization, or maybe it's, you know, the 5 to 10 people that you work with most often on a regular basis. But if we go, so the individual, team, and organization say here, those teams that team score actually does represent everyone within your organization, how they feel about their team. So it's not actually divided up into team. what I'll show you next in the results breakdown would be a way to break things down based on team. And you will just have to make sure that you are not sharing data that is identifiable. And that's sort of left into your hands as far as if you want to break down and filter the data in a certain way, but the system doesn't do that for you. It actually just takes everyone's score on how they feel about their individual team, and it doesn't actually break that into what those teams are and how many people might be on those teams. Is that helpful?
We have a few questions in the chat, Carly.
Would someone mind reading them out?
Janice asked why competence was so low at an org level from Ayerson Academy. Putting us out there, low competence in front of everybody. It was the one score that was a 0, and it just kind of stood out. So I think maybe that was where the question came from.
And I guess the question is those are the kinds of things that can show up that can be like wow moments, like, oh, let me look at that. It's just such a outlier, right? And so when you have something like that, then it's worth digging into, really. I mean, without sharing what our issues are, but it suggests that we really need to think about that, and there's something there. And so while everything else might be steady, you know, that you will find it's a gold mine, and you will find some jewels there that are really important for how you make changes going forward.
Great. Janice asked and answered her own question.
Patty Lee asks, does the team dashboard have to be totally anonymous?
I am not exactly sure what that means. All of the results on here are anonymous. What you will see in the next section that I'm about to get to, which is the results breakdown. And so maybe I'll hold that question till that point. And then if it's still not clear, then we can revisit that. But all of the responses are anonymous. That's how the dashboard is set up. You can download the data and filter it a certain way, but it will not have names attached to it. So in some ways, yes, it has to be anonymous. Yes, but there are ways to like divide information based on team should you need to do that. And then we'll just assume that everyone has the data integrity to not do bad things with the data. The dashboard is not set up to do those things for you.
And then I don't know if this is relevant, but every individual who completes the survey gets their own individual report with their results. So as you are implementing this with your team, managers, for instance, can discuss their people's results and like how they showed up and where that was coming from. Obviously, you need to think carefully about how you do that, but there is that opportunity for that one-on-one conversation.
We can talk about that more in the results and the report section.
For sure. And then Jenna from Community Matters, one question around, can you clarify what the numbers reflect on the charts that organize data by the factors by the quadrants? Okay,
so I think you mean these. And so what this does is, if you remember in the feelings section of this results section, it categorized Ayerson Academy staff into these different quadrants. And so if you remember, we had no one who was in really struggling, and we had most of the people in the living well despite struggle and the consistently thriving, I think 7%, and the not feeling bad and just getting by. And so what that does is it takes those people who are in those categories and shows their scores as an aggregate according to whatever thing you're looking at. So for this one, the system support. And so you can see that people who are not feeling bad, just getting by, feel like they have lower levels of autonomy than people who are in the category of living well despite struggle and consistently thriving. So this is just another way to be able to look at the data. If you know you want most people in that light blue and that green category, it might be a helpful way to look at, well, what trends are we seeing as far as where people are really high in those categories and what factors contribute to that. So for example, maybe this shows that it would be really important to increase people's level of autonomy in order to get them in those well-being categories that we want them to be in. Because we see that consistently people who are in those categories have higher levels than people who are not. Okay, hopefully that answered most of your questions. We're actually going to move on to the next section still within that pink results category, but that's our results breakdown. So in the results breakdown section, this is really where you can start to filter the data and look for trends and patterns that may exist. This is also the section that we're still making some improvements to, so you can probably see a little, some things are a little bit askew. The PERMAH is out of order, for example. And we're really looking to improve this to give it the most functionality possible. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what will be possible coming soon. And so this section really allows you to look at your data. You can see down here all of the different responses for the survey. You can see that they don't have names associated with them, but they do have the demographic categories associated with them. This is also the section where you can download the information. So you could download it in an Excel file, for example, and do any type of additional filtering or analysis that you would need to do. And once again, we're trusting people to be responsible with that data and to not share out levels of data that would feel like they were identifiable to just a few people. So what this also lets us do is filter these responses by some of those questions that we talked about earlier. And so, for example, we can filter this by demographic questions. So if we choose, what team do you consider yourself a member of at Mayerson Academy? And then we can pick Strong Cincinnati. And then we can filter that category, and you can see it just pulls a few of those people from that. So this will really allow you to sort of play around with your data a little bit and start to maybe uncover, you know, who might, what are some patterns that might contribute to higher levels of well-being? Where are we seeing sort of bright spots? Where are we seeing low spots? And what does that mean for our interventions that we might want to try as an organization? So the question earlier about like, is it identifiable, or how much you deal with teams that are one person? You could either not ask that question or ask that person to put themselves as part of a larger team or a group, or just know that when you filter it here by a team, and if there's one person, only one response will show up. And even though it doesn't have a name associated with it, if you know who that person is on that team of one, then you will know whose response that is. And so there is a little bit of trickiness, and who's ever managing the dashboard really needs to be aware of that and be managing that.